It all began on what seemed like a perfectly ordinary morning. She woke up, stretched lazily, and walked into the kitchen to make herself a cup of coffee. The sunlight was soft, filtering through the curtains, and the world outside felt calm and normal. Nothing about that day suggested that something terrifying was about to enter her life. As she sat down with her steaming mug, scrolling through her phone, she noticed the first sign, something so small she almost ignored it. The overhead light flickered for just a second. She looked up, frowned, then shrugged. Old wiring, she thought to herself. Houses creaked all the time, lights flickered, it was nothing new. She brushed it off with a smile and went back to her screen. But then, as she leaned back on the couch, she heard it. A sound so faint, she wasn't sure if it was real, a soft, deliberate creak, like someone slowly stepping on the wooden floorboards in the hallway. Her body froze for a moment. She turned her head, staring at the empty hall. Silence. Nothing was there. A chill crawled up her spine, but she forced herself to laugh. "I've been watching too many horror movies," she whispered under her breath. To prove to herself that nothing was wrong, she got up and checked each room. The hallway was empty. The doors were closed. The windows were locked. She even peeked outside. No one was around. Everything was as it should be. Relieved, she went back to her seat. But as she placed her mug on the table, her phone slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. When she bent down to pick it up, she froze. Just under the couch, in the dim shadow, she thought she saw something move. A flicker, like the glint of two small, shining eyes staring back at her. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked, and it was gone. "Just my imagination," she muttered, shaking her head. She convinced herself nothing was wrong. But deep inside, something told her these are the first warning signs. Signs she should never have ignored. The days that followed only made the strange feeling stronger. At first, she told herself it was nothing, just her mind playing tricks. But the more she ignored it, the more intense it became. At night, as she lay in bed trying to sleep, the lights in the hallway would flicker for no reason. Once she got up and switched them off completely, but even then, she could hear the faint buzz of electricity, as if the wires were alive. Every creak of the wooden floor felt different now, more deliberate, more intentional, like footsteps pacing slowly outside her bedroom door. Sometimes, she would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced that someone had whispered her name. The voice was so soft, almost like a breath against her ear. "Sarah." Her heart would pound violently in her chest. She would sit up, flick the lamp on, and scan the room. Nothing. Just the silence of the night staring back at her. The next morning, when she told herself it was just a dream, something else would happen to shake her nerves. She would find small things out of place. Her phone lying on the floor, the remote on the kitchen counter when she clearly remembered leaving it on the sofa, a chair slightly pulled back from the table, as if someone had been sitting there. Her friends noticed she looked tired, almost haunted. When she laughed it off and said she wasn't sleeping well, one of her neighbors pulled her aside and said, "You should be careful. Strange things have been happening in this house for years." But she just smiled politely and ignored him. Each night, the feeling grew heavier, like an unseen weight pressing down on her. The whispers returned, the shadows in the corners seemed darker than before, and her instincts screamed at her that she wasn't alone. Yet every time, she forced herself to believe it was nothing. She convinced herself she was imagining it. But the truth was simple. These were not just tricks of the mind. They were warnings, and she was ignoring every single one of them. By now, the warning signs were impossible to miss. Yet she refused to see them for what they were. Her friends told her she looked pale and distracted. Her coworkers joked that she seemed to be living in a ghost story. And even her own reflection in the mirror appeared more tired, more hollow each day. Still, she brushed it all off with a smile, convincing herself that life was normal, that nothing strange was happening. The neighbors, however, weren't so lighthearted. One afternoon, as she was returning home, an elderly woman from across the street called out to her. With trembling hands, the woman said, "Child, you should not stay in that house. People left for a reason. The walls have a memory, and sometimes they want to be heard." A shiver ran through her, but she forced a laugh. "Ghost stories again? I don't believe in that nonsense," she replied, walking away quickly. But even as she dismissed the warning, the house kept reminding her. At night, she could hear a steady tapping sound coming from the walls, as though someone inside was trying to get her attention. Sometimes it grew louder, faster, until it sounded like frantic knocking. She pressed her palms against the wall, whispering angrily, "Stop it." And just like that, the noise would end, leaving her in an even more suffocating silence. The whispers, too, grew bolder. They no longer came only at night. In the middle of the day, while she worked on her laptop, she heard it again. "Leave before it's too late." The voice was neither male nor female, but cold, hollow, and echoing as though it came from deep underground. She froze, staring at her empty living room. Any sane person would have packed up and left right then. But she shook her head, forcing a laugh. "It's stress. I need rest. That's all." Every sign, every warning was screaming at her. Yet she ignored them. And by ignoring them, she was walking straight into the nightmare that was waiting for her. The atmosphere inside the house had shifted. What once felt like a home now carried a heaviness, as if the air itself was thick with unseen eyes watching her. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was threatening. Every corner seemed darker than it should be. Every shadow stretched longer than natural, and the walls seemed to breathe with her, expanding and contracting in rhythm with her fear. One evening, as she sat reading on the couch, the temperature suddenly dropped. The warmth from the heater disappeared, replaced by a biting chill that crawled across her skin. She could see her own breath in the air. The lights dimmed until the room was bathed in an eerie glow. Then, from the hallway, she heard it again, slow, deliberate footsteps. Heavy, approaching. Her heart pounded. She forced herself to stand and whisper, "Hello? Who's there?" There was no answer, just the sound of something scraping lightly across the wooden floor. When she finally mustered the courage to step into the hall, it was empty, except for a picture frame lying shattered on the floor. It was her family photo, the glass cracked straight through her face. That night, sleep was impossible. She lay in bed with the covers pulled tight, staring into the darkness. Around 3 a.m., she woke to the sound of movement in her room. Something shifted near the corner. Her eyes adjusted to the dark, and there it was, a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes, standing perfectly still, watching her. She blinked, and it vanished. But when she turned to her mirror, she saw it again, standing behind her reflection. Her chest tightened, her breath came in short gasps, but she refused to scream. Instead, she repeated to herself, "It isn't real. It isn't real." But deep down, she knew this was no longer her imagination. The shadows were alive, the house was no longer hers, and the warnings she had ignored had taken form. Something had entered her home, and it was only getting stronger. By now, fear had rooted itself deep inside her, though she still tried to deny it. Every night, the presence grew stronger, more demanding, as if the house itself was trying to force her to acknowledge it. She could no longer explain away the noises, the shadows, the whispers. They weren't subtle anymore. They were deliberate. They wanted her attention. One cold evening, she walked into the bathroom, steam clouding the mirror from her hot shower. She wiped the glass with her hand, and for a moment she saw her own pale, exhausted face staring back at her. But then her blood ran cold. Across the mirror, letters began to appear slowly, as if traced by an invisible hand. Droplets of condensation slid away to reveal a chilling message. Leave before it's too late. Her heart nearly stopped. She stumbled back, clutching the sink, whispering, "No, no, this can't be real." But the words were clear, etched across the glass as though someone, or something, was standing right behind her, writing the warning. Shaking, she rushed out of the bathroom and slammed the door. She tried to calm herself, telling herself it was a trick of her tired mind. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. This was no coincidence. This was the clearest message yet. That night, she barely slept. The whispers came more often, circling her bed, sometimes hissing in her ear. The shadows no longer stayed in the corners. They crept closer, hovering near her walls, moving across her ceiling. Every sound was amplified: the ticking clock, the groaning pipes, the scratching inside the walls. Her neighbor's warning echoed in her mind. You should not stay in that house. The writing on the mirror repeated in her thoughts like a curse. Leave before it's too late. But she was stubborn. Terrified, yes, but still unwilling to leave her home. She convinced herself again, if I ignore it, it will go away. She didn't realize then that ignoring this final warning meant sealing her fate. The night after the mirror's warning, everything changed. The house no longer whispered, it screamed. The silence she once clung to was gone, replaced by a constant hum of unease. The shadows didn't just lurk anymore. They moved with purpose. They followed her. She tried to distract herself, turned the TV on, played music loudly, even left the lights burning in every room. But nothing worked. The lights flickered violently. The TV hissed into static, and the music warped into distorted whispers that seemed to form words she couldn't bear to understand. Around midnight, she heard the sound again, footsteps. But this time, they weren't faint or distant. They were heavy, echoing, moving down the hallway straight toward her room. She locked the door, her hands trembling, heart pounding so loud she thought it might give her away. The footsteps stopped, right outside her door. She froze, holding her breath. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, the doorknob began to turn. Back and forth, back and forth. She wanted to scream, but her throat locked shut. When the door didn't open, the footsteps retreated. Relieved, she let out a shaky breath until she realized the mistake. The footsteps weren't retreating. They were inside her room. She felt it before she saw it. The air grew heavy, pressing down on her chest. She turned her head slowly, and there it was, tall, shadowy, its glowing eyes fixed on her, standing inches from her bed. She scrambled backward, but the figure moved with her, each step silent, inevitable. Suddenly, the lights went out. The room plunged into pitch black. She could feel its presence closing in, the air freezing around her, the sound of whispers erupting all at once. Her last thought was clear and sharp, cutting through the terror. I should have listened. I should have left when I had the chance. But it was too late. The house was silent again the next morning. Too silent. The neighbors noticed the curtains never opened, and the lights that once flickered through the night were now dark. Concerned, one of them knocked on her door. No answer. Hours passed. Finally, the police were called. When they entered, the air inside felt wrong. Icy, heavy, as if the walls themselves were watching. The officers moved from room to room, their flashlights sweeping across overturned furniture and shattered glass. It was clear she had struggled, but there was no sign of her. Not in the kitchen, not in the living room, not even in the bedroom. And then they found it, the bathroom mirror, the same one that once carried the warning. Across its fogged surface, New words had appeared, etched into the glass itself as if carved from the inside. She didn't listen. One of the officers touched the mirror, only to yank his hand back immediately. It was ice cold, colder than anything in the house. The words shimmered faintly, almost glowing, as though written by something that didn't belong to this world. No trace of her was ever discovered. It was as if she had simply vanished in a thin air. The case went cold, but the neighbors whispered their own theories. Some said the house had claimed her. Others believed she had been taken by the shadow she ignored for too long. A few swore they still saw her face in the window at night, pale and pressed against the glass, silently begging to be freed. But the truth remained a mystery. The only evidence left behind was the message on the mirror, a chilling reminder that the warnings had been real all along. And every new tenant who dared to live in that house soon reported the same things: the flickering lights, the whispers, the shadows in the corners. The signs were always there. The choice was always the same: ignore them and face the same fate.